Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And boy, this one applies to just about everybody. Everybody's got a bank.
Everybody's got a bank, and it's a large bank, small bank, medium size. And we're going to be talking today about the future of banking in Oklahoma and generally with somebody that knows quite a bit about it. I can quickly say that with a great deal of pride. My son, John Meyers, is going to be here with us. John is the Oklahoma City Market President for RCB Bank and is going to be talking to us about community banks and what they do, how they do it, how they differ from the mega banks or the large banks, and what is the future of the community bank in Oklahoma.
And it's all coming up today on The Verdict. We hope you'll stay with us.
I've known I was going to be an artist since I was a little kid. I still have teachers that in grade school that still have my artwork. I think I told them something along the lines, this is keep that, it's going to be worth money someday. I'm Justin Mader, I'm an artist, and I'm Chickasaw. My muse is the Muskokian, Mississippian art. When I see that, my mind just fills up with bubbles of ideas. My big thing right now is shell carving, the shell gorgets. My work is refined more and more until I found my own rhythm. I also do metallurgy, where I've been acid etching copper and hammering copper to make a copper repoussé. You only have one chance to do it right, so it requires a lot of planning and thought and just patience. My Chickasaw heritage is the foundation of who I am. It's the roots of where I come from, and it inspires me as an artist and inspires the tenacity of never giving up.
Learn more about today's Chickasaws at profilesofanation.com.
It's a North American energy revolution. We're the fastest growing source of new oil and natural gas supplies in the world.
The shift to North American energy will create approximately 3 million jobs.
All that money we've been sending overseas, $400 billion a year. Imagine that staying in our economy. It's a game changer.
Real energy independence starts now. And it starts with Oklahoma.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Personal privilege for me. I'm very happy to welcome my son, John Meyers, with us today. John, of course, grew up here in Oklahoma City. He is the Oklahoma City Market President for RCB Bank, and we're going to be talking about banking and community banking today. John did his undergraduate work at Baylor University. He got a degree from the Graduate School of Banking in Boulder, Colorado. For 20 years or so, it's hard to imagine 20 years looking at John, how young he looks. For 20 years, John's been involved in banking in Oklahoma and Texas. He's now with RCB Bank and here to tell us about what's going on with community banking in Oklahoma and the future of banking. John, welcome back.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Tell us about your bank, first of all. What's the history of this bank? Is it new? Is it old?
RCB was founded in the Depression by the Robson family.
That wasn't the greatest time to start a bank, was it?
No, it was not. But since that time, it's done very well.
Yeah.
And the Robson family has allowed the bank to grow, and along with the employees, we now have, we've grown to almost 40 branches this year.
What's RCB stand for?
Rogers County Bank. So our headquarters is in Claremore, Oklahoma. And so we're an Oklahoma State chartered bank.
And how many branches are there?
By 2 months from now, well, I guess I shouldn't say 2 months from now, but we'll have 40 branches.
That's awesome.
All over the state?
Yeah. All over the state and Kansas.
What is a community bank? I hear that term, but I couldn't tell you what it means exactly.
Well, it changes. It used to be that they lumped all banks with assets under $1 billion in the category of community bank. As banking has evolved and banks have changed, they've typically reserved that term now for banks that accept money as deposits and lend that money back out into those communities in which they have locations. For instance, we're not going to make loans typically in New York or in Florida. We're going to make loans in Oklahoma.
Right, so you're licensed by the state. So can you make loans to people that live other places?
We can,
You can.
but typically we choose to make loans to people in our communities.
Okay, and do you have depositors from other states, or just generally it's Oklahoma?
Generally in Oklahoma and Kansas.
What's the distinction here? If you're not a community bank, what are you? What other kind of banks are there besides community banks?
Well, some people call them national banks or mega banks, multinational banks. Typically banks that have operations in or in different states, are publicly traded on a major stock exchange, and some have operations in other countries.
Now, in your personal background, you've worked with both types of banks, community banks and major mega banks, if you will.
Yes.
In Oklahoma City in Oklahoma and Texas.
Oklahoma and Houston, yes.
Yeah.
The consumer's interaction with their bank has changed dramatically over the years. When I was a kid and first exposed to the bank, I remember my mother getting her canceled checks in a big envelope every month, and she would set them out on the bed and kind of put them in order, and then she would go through and she would mark off the list, each one, to make sure that it had cleared. You don't see people putting all their checks on the bed anymore. In fact, they may not ever even go to their bank. It's a lot of people are doing it online, and so how does that change the relationship when it's become less personal?
Well, it's changed it dramatically. People want, first of all, it's about what the consumer wants. So typically the consumer these days wants immediate interaction with their bank. So if a check clears, they want to know it, and they want to know it now. So for instance, now we have text banking. So when a check clears, when a card is swiped, a text message is sent to your phone to tell you immediately, by the way, $94 was charged to your account 5 seconds ago. So it is an immediate gratification, an immediate need for information. People still go to branches, people still go through drive-thrus, especially when you're dealing with large cash items. Some people have a lot of checks that they'd like to deposit, or applying for loans, things like that. But your average person does not go to the branch.
Interest rates are very low right now. How does that affect the bottom line of a bank?
Well, margins have definitely been compressed. We've been in a long-term, low interest rate environment. And what that means for banks is that the difference between what we pay for deposits and then what we charge for loans, that margin is continually being compressed. Now, as rates rise, banks' margins tend to improve. But it's been a tough road to hoe for banks the last several years.
From what I can derive from just the national press, it doesn't look like the interest rate compression is going to change anytime soon. Yellen, her name, I can't think of her first name. Janet Yellen, now head of, I guess, the Federal Reserve, has indicated that she thinks the interest rates are going to stay about where they are. Is that your take on the situation? Is that what you think is going to happen?
Well, I quit predicting interest rates a long time ago. I never thought they'd be this low this long, and they have. But there are a lot of indications that the underlying economy is improving. Therefore, you would think that rates would gradually increase from where they are now, as long as the economy and employment improves. But the other major impact to community banks and to banks in general is the increase in expenses. And most of that is due to two things. The major issue is regulatory changes having to do with Dodd-Frank and the changes in the mortgage lending laws. Has severely impacted banks. The addition of staff, the addition of attorneys to deal with these changing regulatory environments really affects all banks, but it specifically affects community banks because of their size.
Is the supervision level now greater on a bank-by-bank assessment than it was when you started 20 years ago?
No, it is much greater. And not only that, it's just the rules, there's so many more rules. And the banks are still grappling with how to adapt to those rules.
Well, are relationships less important? Because you always hear a lot of business people They follow their banker around. Their banker changes banks, they change banks because they have a relationship with that lender. And I would think if the rules are tighter and there's less discretion, then the relationship with that individual banker seems to matter less.
Well, I would argue that the relationship may actually matter more now.
Really? Why so?
Well, because to navigate these waters of changing rules, you need to deal with somebody that you trust and that you've known for a long time. We all have the same rules. Now, how you help your client manage those rules and get through that minefield is important. If you're buying a home and you need to close in 20 days, then you need to work with a mortgage banker that you can depend on. The rates are all fairly close. There's not a big differentiation in that. So relationships are very important.
Well, the community banks are facing challenges from the major banks. I guess they're facing challenges from other types of lending institutions, such as credit unions and the like. Is the amount of competition that community banks, particularly in Oklahoma, facing now something that's increasing or decreasing?
I would say the competition is actually decreasing. I would say the environment is becoming very difficult, not necessarily due to competition, but due to other factors. I think, when we talk about other banking institutions, a lot of Oklahomans are underserved or do not have a bank. And that is a huge challenge because their alternative is to go to a pawn shop, cash their check, or a check cashing store. And the fees associated with those are tremendous, especially when you're dealing with lower income people.
You're not going to get ahead dealing in that environment very
Typically
long.
not, no.
Yeah. We have a graphic that I want to show, and it illustrates a couple of trends that I think people might find interesting, and we're looking at it here on the screen, John. And we don't want people to just necessarily have to pull out the numbers, but generally, what are you trying to show there?
Well, it's just showing the rapid decline of the number of banks.
So on the left in blue is the number of banks, and this is over a 20-year time?
Correct, yep.
Since you started?
Yes.
Did you cause any of this?
Most of it.
Okay. The left side in blue is number of banks declining rather precipitously over a 20-year period. What's the right-hand side?
That's the total amount of deposits. So you can see what you can take away from this graph is obviously two things. The number of banks are shrinking, and the concentration of those deposits are going into fewer and fewer banks.
So there's a consolidation of banks, but it doesn't mean that there's less money going into banks. I mean, it's
Correct.
going up and up and up and up. And
it's just the larger banks are getting larger.
Yeah. So the major fight going on is between the banks.
Correct.
To survive.
Yeah. To survive, yep.
Our guest is John Meyers. We're talking about banking in the state of Oklahoma and elsewhere. We'll be right back.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
We're talking banking with John Meyers. In a rural setting, is the banking environment different than an urban setting? Are the lenders coming in with different needs and different sorts of capital?
The environment is definitely different. First of all, some communities may have only one bank in their entire city or maybe even county.
Mm-hmm.
So if that bank were to sell or to close for whatever reason, it can put an undue stress on that community. Now the banking commissioners and everything try to keep that from happening, but it's definitely a different feel. There's definitely more specialized needs, whether it's agricultural lending,
mm-hmm.
Consumer lending in those communities. And they're very well served in Oklahoma today. I think we have 160 something chartered banks in Oklahoma. Now that is down, but there are the health of the Oklahoma banking is very strong.
You talked about rural lending and agricultural lending, and although the individual family farm is largely disappearing in many parts of the country, are there still situations where, because of weather conditions or whatever, the crop didn't come in, people need money to tend them over, and how do you collateralize the future of a crop?
Well, typically that is done through governmental agencies,
mm-hmm.
Through insurance, and different types of crop insurance.
And so it no longer goes through traditional banking standards?
Well, we have traditional banking standards, but to back that up, we have insurance behind them.
I see.
To what extent, John, is the abandonment by Oklahoma of the ban against branching, to what extent has that contributed to the growth, for instance, of your bank?
Well,
used to be banks couldn't branch in Oklahoma.
Correct.
Now they can.
Now they can. Well, you've seen a proliferation of branches across the state, which I would argue has been great for the state. But I think what you're going to see now in the future, I think branches are now down a little over 3%, almost 4%. I think you'll continue to see consolidations of branches because of technology and because of whether or not a town is growing or shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you'll continue to see the number of branches decrease as well as the number of banks decrease.
There's always action at the state legislature that affects the banking industry. Are you guys usually on the offense or the defense when it comes to what you're trying to get accomplished?
Or are you hiding?
We're always on the defense. Say that with clarity.
Somebody's trying to impact your business.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, that seems to be the case in a lot of situations.
I think that's true.
What should we be concerned about, if anything, on the consolidation in the banking industry? Is that a concern for a consumer?
I don't necessarily think it's a concern. I think it's something to be aware of,
yeah.
Especially if you're a small business owner. I see consumers being pretty well served, whether it's through technology or through their banks. They have a wide variety of choices. Small businesses tend to be a little more susceptible to change. So I think they need to be aware of who they're banking with, who their banker is, the health of their bank, and what their bank strategy is. Basically, banks fall into two categories. Either you're a buyer or you're a seller. And that is going to continue for the next 5 years. I think our chart showed just under 7,000 banks remaining in the United States, down from 18,000. A lot of the numbers I'm seeing are seeing that go to 4,000 or maybe even 3,000. So this trend is going to accelerate, if anything.
Well, most industries are consolidating. I guess we shouldn't necessarily expect banking to be interesting, but when it comes to soft drinks, there's 3 or 4 big players. There's a lot of little players. Airlines, a great example, the oligarchy. So, could we get to a point where there's 10 to 50 banks instead of 4,000 banks? Is that possible?
It's possible. You look at Canada,
yeah.
Other countries, England. Oh yes.
There?
Oh yeah.
They don't have thousands of banks like we do.
They do not. No. I don't think we'll ever get to that point. I should say ever, but in our lifetimes, we won't ever get to that point. There's still always going to be community banks, whether or not they're $500 million banks, whether or not they're $2 billion banks. There's always going to be a place for community banks.
John, what caused you to be drawn to associate with the community bank? Because you've had experience both in community banks and larger banks. What drew you finally to hitch your star to a community bank?
Well, I tend to like to do business with people I know and in the communities that I live, which is Oklahoma City. So, And when you're with a larger bank, typically you may all of your customers may be even in another state. So for me, it's a better fit, and I enjoy it.
And what's the future of banking? Is this something that young people should be going to college thinking about a career, or is it a dwindling number of people that are in the banking business?
I think the types of bankers needed is going to change. From the technology side, there's a huge need for smart people who know banking, which is sometimes rare, but especially when it comes to technology.
Is this for the consumer, or are you talking about lending to technology companies?
No, I'm talking about just your systems.
The operations
the
of
operations
your business,
of a bank, how the mobile site communicates with your desktop.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it freaks me out when I transfer money off my phone and I think I just transferred, X amount of dollars and I use my phone. There seems something wrong about this.
Well, I think it's great.
I love the convenience, but I'm just thinking it's really just happened. I just pulled out my phone and just did a banking transaction, and it worked and it went through, and I'm just thinking, gee, it just seems so much different, than you think typical of a way a bank would interact with its customer.
Yeah, well, and that interaction is going to continue to evolve, whether it's through coupons or whether it's through promotions. So I think as the technology, especially of credit cards, evolves and catches up with the rest of the world, that interaction will continue to blossom.
How do you try to foster the relationship with your customers, your clients at RCB Bank that may be different than what they'll experience at a larger bank?
Typically it's asking questions about
Access
their business.
Then.
Yes. Just asking them, how are they doing? What challenges are you facing? How can I help you? And if I can't help you, who do I know that may be able to help you? Those kind of individualized responses and attention to customers still goes a long way.
It does seem like there's more fees, though, than there used to be. And I understand that as you're talking about it, as the spread and the low interest rates affects you, you got to make money somehow.
Correct.
And if it's through an ATM charge or it's through some other account balance charge, how are customers reacting to those changes through the years, and how do you deal with that?
It's funny. Some things people are willing to pay for, and then some things they're just not. But if you think about it, the ability to pay checks, pay bills on your phone, and transfer money for free, in effect, is a great deal. You don't have to get in your car. You don't have to buy a checkbook. You don't have to buy stamps. I mean, so there's value in a lot of this, and a lot of the services that are provided. So typically, there's a lot less pushback than you would think.
Let's focus in on one type of fee, an ATM fee.
Sure.
I don't know what the marketplace is today, but it used to be that every time you used an ATM, you were charged a fee. Then there came to be a distinction between whether you were using an ATM of your own bank or a foreign bank or non-local bank. What do you see in regard to ATM fees in the future?
Well, the fees have ranged currently anywhere from $1 to $5 when you use an ATM that is not of your financial institution. But typically banks don't charge at all to using their own ATM, and I don't think that'll change ever.
Well, what's the future of banking? In the time we have left on the show, what would you like our audience to take away in this very transitional time for your industry?
I think if you're, especially if you're the owner of a small business, I would talk to your banker, do some research on the bank who you bank with, and kind of figure out what their future is. What do they want to do? Are they a buyer or are they a seller? And then you can plan around that.
What do you want Congress to do?
Oh gosh. It's
and
we
you have
may
like
need
20
another
seconds.
show.
You have
No,
like 20 seconds.
that you can say and we can broadcast.
I don't know. We have to end it there.
Yeah, I'm not sure who they're trying to protect sometimes.
That's right.
That's right. John Meyers is our guest at an interesting conversation today about community banking. Thank you for coming on and letting people know a lot more than I'm sure they did when the show began.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
And Kit and I'll be back with the final word when we return.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, Each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I think for us, once we got started and we began to see the tremendous need just within our state, it really was just a calling for us. The blessings far outweigh any obstacles that we've faced.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We are wrapping up a show with John Meyers. We learned a lot more about community banking. I know I learned a lot. I hope our audience did too.
Well, I know that there's been transitions from community banks to large banks and back. And of course, in Oklahoma, we've had enormous bank upheavals with the Penn Square Bank failure and all that came from that. And so banking has always been much like the oil business. It's really up or really down.
Yeah.
And you're really pleased with it or not, as the case may be, and the economy may dictate. But the future of community banking, I think, in Oklahoma is bright. And I think our community bankers are tuned in to the needs of their customers and what services they have to provide to remain competitive. So I think we should take away from this show a very bright and encouraging message.
Don't you think banking, though, has changed since the 80s? You know, 100 banks failed in the state of Oklahoma, and it's just a different industry today.
Oh, it is. Indeed different, and I hope we never get to that old stage again.
We like to give website information of our guests, and you can get more information about John and his company at rcbbank.com. That's rcbbank.com. And we have a website, theverdict.tv. Head there and tell us about a guest you'd like to see. For Kent, I'm Mick. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.